What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of the Milwaukee Sports Performance Podcast. My name is Michael Falk, and I am joined today by Dr. Hannah Greving, one of the physical therapists at Kinetic Sports Medicine and Performance. If you have not heard her talk before, she's been on the social medias and YouTube and previous podcast interview. She was a Division I lacrosse player at Marquette University that unfortunately tore her ACL during her career there, had to go through the rehabilitation process, and it has really informed her interest in ACL rehab, ACL prevention as a physical therapist at our practice. But Hannah also has a really unique experience because she's also actively coaching on an elite national level with Black lacrosse in our area. So she is really on the front line, both as a physical therapist trying to work with clients to get back from injury and prevent future injury, and then also as a coach trying to help her team and her players stay available, stay on the field, and hopefully not have to go through the rehab that she went through as a player. So Hannah, thank you for taking some time today to come and share your insights on ACL prevention.
Thanks for having me. Love to talk about it.
Yeah, no, I feel like we just have to bring up all these bad memories and have you share your experience. But I do think it gives you such a unique perspective. Like, I can talk about it. I've seen so many players go through it, but I, knock on wood, have not previously gone through it and hope to never go through it. So having your insights is really helpful. So let's just review, if people haven't heard before, just a little bit about your story with your ACL injury and how it happened back. It was your junior year of college, if I remember correctly.
Yep, it was the second game in season of my junior year. So relatively injury-free before then. In high school, I had maybe like a little left. It was my left knee, which was the same side that I ended up tearing my ACL on, had some sort of mechanism in one high school game, and it kind of was stiffened up the next day. They didn't really find anything in particular. I didn't go to PT at that time, but again, maybe that was a factor of reason why. But before then, relatively injury-free, hadn't had any ACL tears previously, no other major orthopedic surgeries or anything like that. So this was just kind of like a first one and done is what I was saying. So one and only. But it was the second game of my junior year. We had a game a few days before, and then we were away at Northwestern. It was, I believe, the third quarter. I thought it was the fourth, the day of. But again, there's lots going on, and your brain isn't always in the right spot after that. But I was cutting towards my teammate with my left hand. I stopped to then try to roll back, switch to my right to open up my right hand. But unfortunately, that one plant, again, put my foot in the ground. In the video, you can just see my knee does not move the way that it should. I heard all the cracks, pops, had a bone bruise. So I ended up being a torn ACL, MCL, and meniscus with a bone bruise. So it wasn't just the ACL. So there are many other contributing factors that made my case relatively challenging, especially on the front end of just, again, non-weight bearing, left and extension for a while. But that definitely made things harder initially.
Yeah, super frustrating. So it sounds like non-contact, just cut, pivot, no one hit you or fell on your leg or anything like that.
No, there was a girl next to me, but she didn't have anything to do with it. It was just more of me trying to open up my right hand, but didn't quite get there.
Unfortunately, as we start talking through, I think those non-contact injuries, when we start thinking about prevention, those are often the first thing that comes to mind. There is no real solution when someone falls on your knee, which can just be part of sports. But I think some of the data does start to share that maybe there's some things on the non-contact side that we can do. Like right after the injury, what went through your head? What were you feeling on the field? What thoughts were rolling as you went, through the diagnosis and all that?
First of all, I was like, this hurts. This does not feel good. Again, I heard everything happen, which I think was the worst thing. But again, they walk you off the field, you're out for the game, and they give you the crutches. And I remember crutching off the field, and I had this one kind of weird situation where my foot got caught in the turf. I could just immediately feel my MCL did not feel great. My teammates were trying to be supportive, and everybody's like, you don't know until you know. We got the MRI the next day. It's just a whirlwind of emotion. But I was in complete denial. I was like, no, I'll be fine. There's no other option than to be okay. You never think it's going to happen to you until it does. And so I was for sure in denial. I think I was, just an optimistic person in general. And to have that happen was just not part of the plan. And of course it never is, but it was immediate denial. You go through all the 5 stages of grief within 48 hours, maybe even less than that, but definitely was a shock. But I thought I was going to be fine. Even probably deep down, I knew that I wasn't going to be, but
yeah.
So,
I think that's really interesting what you said there about the complete denial that this is never going to happen to me, because it's something that I've noticed a lot and something that I think is relevant to why we're doing this podcast. We get
Mhm.
asked a bunch to come out and do injury prevention workshops, come talk about how to prevent ACL injuries, come share insights on how to not let people strain their hamstrings, whatever the case may be. It's always parents and families of people that are currently injured with the injury that would like us to come and talk about the prevention side, or maybe it's coaches. But when we've done these workshops in the past, we do probably at least one a year somewhere. The vast number of the attendees are people that have previously had the injury. The number of people that have been there that have never gone through that process it's very low unless it's something that's like mandatory by their coach. And I think
Mhm.
it's something that why hopefully sharing a little bit of your story and some of what we're going to talk about today can maybe get some of this information out and help people connect that it's easy to sit there and say, yeah, it's never going to happen to me. I'm invincible. Like it sucks for that person, but never me. Just say, hey, maybe there are some things that you can do on the front end to give yourself a better chance of it not happening to you. I wanted to dive in just briefly. I don't want to go in too depth with the rehab because we really want to start on the prevention side, but just give people a feel for what did the recovery look like after, down on the field, get the surgery? How long did it take for you to get back out and compete? And what was that process like?
Yep, it was from day 1 to 11 months later. So I tore it Valentine's Day of my junior year. So, and then I was dead and set on playing in that first game my senior year. I probably wasn't even fully ready, rehabbed and back, but in my mind, I was like, I'm not taking another game off. I'm not going to not play my senior year with my best friends. There was a hard deadline that I knew I wanted to get back for that first game like a year later. I was still doing knee extensions during lift that season. Like I was still doing the stuff. Like sure, I probably could have taken that whole other season off and really felt good for my fifth year, but I was, just sometimes something's got to give and I put the work in. So I was like, there's no way that that's not happening. But early on, I did struggle a lot with swelling post-op because of my MCL and the meniscus and then having to be non-weight bearing after surgery too. So total of 2.5 months on crutches, like toe touch, and then about like 3.5 locked in extension. So really struggled with my flexion early on. My walking took a long time to get back. And then around August, September was when I was starting to run again, do a lot of like the pre-running plyos, all that stuff. And it, again, wasn't probably super smooth, but it was just better than not having those crutches, brace, all that stuff. And then as the fall went on, getting more into cutting drills, return to contact, all that stuff. Still worked with a PT at home. Winter break, again, we weren't on campus. And then again, started getting back into all the heavy practice stuff when I got back from winter break right before that senior year season. So did PT 2 times a week relatively consistently. I was doing stuff at practice. I was doing stuff up at training room outside of practice on top of already doing all the, classes and labs and eat and sleep too was important. So it was just a lot all at once and definitely was a challenging 11 months, but I'd say more so on the front end than the back.
Yeah. Man, I think that's interesting because I think people don't understand that there's the physical cost of going through the injury, but there's the time cost. Like you were trying to balance being a student athlete, which is hard enough. And now you've got all this extra stuff you need to do. And I don't know if you feel this way, but you're spending all that time trying to get back versus your teammates. If they were willing to, they could spend some of that extra time trying to improve or get better. And you're just trying to return to what you were before. So there's a development cost as well.
People who took your spot or people who naturally like stepping in the role that you were a part of. And so not only are you having to rehab yourself back, but again, like when that 11 months comes later, it's like, okay, I still have to now essentially be good enough to be better than I was before because people during that whole time are still spending the amount of hours that I am rehabbing, improving their game and improving their skill. So there's definitely that extra level that makes it even all that more complicated. So
Yeah. If it wasn't bad enough, we're just going to throw that on top of it as well.
for sure.
No, that's great. And I appreciate you being open and sharing that because I don't think people often consider all aspects of this injury and just the effect of that time out. And hopefully it gives motivation is not the right word, but just the importance of doing everything that we can on the front end. We know we can't prevent 100% of the injuries, but it is worth some time and effort to try and reduce the risk as much as we can. So now you were a college student, you were already in exercise science, ex-phys, you knew you wanted to be a PT, but now you've finished PT, you've been out working and seeing lots of ACL rehab. back, 2020 hindsight, do you think there was a gap or something that maybe you wish you would have done differently leading up to that injury that you didn't address that, if young Hannah knew what Hannah today knew, she would have modified or changed before that injury occurred?
Yeah, I definitely think, not a ton of people love plyometrics, but they're really important for a reason. I think with your strength conditioning coaches, they give you a lot of that stuff in the fall during a lot of like lifting and all your agility work and everything like that. I know that when I would come home from winter break, I would still do that plan. I was probably lifting the heaviest weight I ever had that winter right before I tore it. My hamstrings were probably not where they needed to be. My quads were probably too strong for what they needed to be. And I think just having either that knowledge of that asymmetry or knowing those things, biasing my exercises towards one thing or the other, adding in those plyos that I know that are so boring but are so good for me to do. Like that wasn't the exciting thing. Like everybody, at least a lot of my teammates love to lift. We love to run. We love to do all that stuff. But again, within that spectrum, there's a lot of those other things that kind of get brushed under the rug. And I definitely was one of those people. I'd rather just, put weight on the bar and get a good lift in and go work on my endurance and my running because that's what I'm going to have to do for, the whole game essentially. But
Yeah.
I think, no one likes to do, at least I don't like to do any of the plyos and all that, like that box deceleration stuff, but is the reason why I program it so much for my kids and all my patients too. So.
Yeah, no, it's always like when you have a coach that's giving you something else to do, it's usually the stuff that's like the hardest. It's probably the most important for you, like the stuff you're really good
Exactly.
at that you like with some of those other things. No, I think that's really interesting. You hit on it a lot with the deceleration because I think that's going to be looking at your mechanism. People sometimes don't tie, oh, you made a cut. But yeah, but there's decelerating so that you can reaccelerate in a different direction. But deceleration is a key component of all of those things and really important. So I guess now with your experience, knowing what you know, going through it all, and now you're also working as a coach. So yes, PT side, and we'll have Brett on here in a little while. He'll go into some of the, the hard science and the boring numbers that are really important. But you're actually out there on the front lines, like working with these young high school female athletes that are playing cutting, pivoting sport that statistically are at the highest risk of an injury like this. What are some things that you are trying to incorporate and preach and bring into your team that hopefully is moving the needle and helping keep them safe and from not going through this injury that you've learned from your experience?
I think especially for, the high school athlete, a lot of their warm-ups are more of a vocal warm-up than a body warm-up. So there's a lot of chatter. It's exciting to see, especially at the beginning of the season. You're excited to see your friends, you're excited to see your teammates. But like a casual warm-up, especially one that doesn't focus on deceleration, focus on the ability to stop yourself, a lot of those kind of plyos that I was mentioning, I've included a lot of that, not only for my team, but the entirety of the Black Lax Club. And so hopefully that can just be, again, something that I mentioned to them is, yes, I know that this is challenging. This is different than maybe your normal warm up, but this is what's going to help you prep your body most for the practice that you have or for the game that you have. And so I think, again, making that big change of actually getting your body ready for what it has to do. If you don't do any deceleration work in your warm up and you have to decelerate at practice, that should be included in your warm up. Again, that's that same mechanism that we see time over time is that plant and twist, that change of direction, that deceleration into a reacceleration. All of those things are essential for a warm up. And one thing that I really focus my girls on is, okay, it's being a practice. We do our warm up, we do it well, and that should set us up for the rest of the practice as well. And then we've also implemented more force plate testing, just as like in a baseline and a post test. We can be able to see on counter movement jumps, single leg, double leg, rebound jumps. Are they favoring one side versus the other? Always cutting off of one side or the other? Are they ignoring using one side versus the other? Just all of that like baseline data just to see, oh, hey, we noticed XYZ asymmetry on your braking rate of force development. We have this as a couple exercises you can do on your own to hopefully help with that. So those are a couple things that we've started implementing. Again, that nice lacrosse specific warm up with the deceleration in mind, and then more force plate data as baseline. Unfortunately, if they do get hurt, we still have those pre-numbers that we can refer back to when they are healthy.
No, I think that's all great. I mean, I think out of curiosity, you have, I hesitate to call it a luxury because you had to go through the whole injury and rehab process, but you have this unique perspective, clinician, coach, also athlete that went through it. So you really understand all sides of it. When you now are in a position that you're talking to, maybe it's fellow coaches, maybe it's parents, someone that doesn't A, have your clinical training, B, also just your experience going through it. What do you think are things that maybe they don't understand about trying to prevent injuries that you've had, I don't want to say the hardest time explaining to them, but trying to build buy-in and getting people to trust these programs and the time that you're asking them to put into trying to stay on the field and stay healthy?
I think the biggest thing is strength training and moving well at a young age. I think, I had, tore when I was 20, 21 years old. I'd already been doing certain patterns of squats, lunging, hinging, all of those things. I think, especially as we see so many younger and younger 12, 13, 14-year-old athletes, females, tear their ACL. Again, a lot of that is due to a lack of strength training and having consistent load to hopefully, again, support what their body's doing on the field, but also just having and learning movement patterns with those kind of strength training principles in mind. I think that's a huge thing that, again, younger males are usually in this weight room before us. And that's, again, another factor of a reason why females are so much more commonly tearing their ACL. But I think at such a young age, especially a lot of these high schoolers, just getting them into knowing how their body works, knowing how their body moves is something that's really, again, takes time away from the field, but helps their athletic performance on the field so much more.
Yeah, no, I think that's so critical. I want to wrap this up. We've got a busy afternoon taking care of more clients at the office, but do you have one parting shot to athletes or parents that might be listening to this podcast in particular, something that you would love to just try to emphasize to them? What would that be?
It would be an ounce of prevention is worth every possible effort imaginable. Like having to go through ACL injury is horrible. No one has a good time doing ACL rehab. And so any effort, any strength training, any preventative PT, anything like that you can do in now to prevent that from happening is completely worth it. And getting all those baseline numbers, getting all of the objective data that you can to focus on those asymmetries, those weaknesses, as you continue to get older, as you continue to get stronger, as you continue to excel in your sport. Any prevention that you can, being consistent with that is completely worth it. Nobody wants to be out of their sport for 9 to 12 months. You have the mental side of things, you have the physical side of things, and you have to then go to school and do everything else. Like any extra thing that you can just do now to prevent it is 100% worth it. And what I recommend 10 times out of 10.
That's great. My old man sayings are rubbing off on you. With an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Maybe it's worth 10 pounds of cure. I should increase the amount. So, all right, Hannah, I appreciate you being open, share your experience, trying to get out there and educate people. And you're really on the front line doing this both in the office and the clinic, and then also out in the field in the community. So I commend you for that, and excited to continue to see the progress that you can make, and hopefully be able to change some of these statistics and help players not have to go through what you went through. So I appreciate your time and expertise, and have a great rest of your afternoon.
Awesome. Thanks, Michael. You too.
All right, Brett, thanks for taking some time to come on today. So we just finished up talking with Hannah, and she kind of went through her injury history with ACL, which I know you're familiar with, but her mechanism was she went, decelerated, stopped, did a roll dodge away from the plant side, felt the snap, crackle, pops, knee gave out, pain, swelling, ACL, meniscus, MCL, all of that. Is that relatively common, or what's the incidence? Is it more common to have a contact injury or a non-contact injury in ACL?
Yep. Any data that I've seen is more common for the non-contact one. I wouldn't quote me on any exact stats today, but I can give rough ballparks. I think it is like 3/4 or 70% tend to be non-contact. So they are a lot more common. Hannah's example is kind of like the epitome of what you'll typically hear with these ones. Like usually there's some scenario that is a little bit more complicated than I'm just running in a straight line, happen to tear my ACL. But it definitely does still happen with contact ones, where you step on someone's foot, someone collides with you. I have implanted foot and someone hits my knee, but those are just way less common.
Yeah, that's been my experience. I think if you go to a contact sport like football, okay, an offensive lineman falling on your knee or something, those things happen, but definitely, especially in cutting, pivoting sports, those plants are overall much more consistent.
Right. And part of it might also be just the exposure, like the non-contact, mechanism they get into. That happens potentially hundreds of times in a game, but it's not that common in a match scenario that I'm going to have that contact situation that could jeopardize my ACL. So sometimes it's just that they experience those positions more, and then they might have the wrong place, wrong time, that it happens to be the injury one.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point. I think exposures are one of the underreported statistics that the better the athlete, the more games they play, the more minutes that they're out there, the more tournaments they play over the course of the season, there's more potential opportunities to get hurt. Sometimes you see starters that get hurt more than reserves, and everyone go, is it because they're faster or stronger or anything like that? Maybe it's just because they're out there more frequently for more minutes.
Right. Fortunately, it's not as clear cut as it seems. There's always multiple reasons.
Yeah, for sure. But I do think that kind of leads me into my next question. Anyone that knows, obviously we talk about prevention, but I really try to emphasize that we can't prevent all injuries. It's probably better to talk about risk reduction. But anytime we're going to go about, okay, let's build a program to reduce the risk profile. I think you and I both start by working backwards. Okay, what are the risks of the injury and what can we modify or what are unmodifiable? So if you look at ACL injuries, what are some of the key risk factors that we want to target or maybe some that we can't address?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important to recognize both. Like I usually bring up the ones that you can't really change, but what good does that do? Because it's not super actionable. But the type of sport someone plays is going to be a big one. If I swim, I'm probably less likely to tear my ACL than if I play lacrosse or soccer or basketball. It's those cutting and pivoting sports that are going to have the highest risk, which that's not something that someone's really going to change unless it's a sport they're just very willing to give up. The other really common one that does have more risk, but you can't change is their gender. So if, females are a lot higher risk. I think I've seen stats 2 to 8 times more than male counterparts to have the same type of an injury. And I think there's a lot of reasons that go into that, which maybe we'll delve into. But there are, hormonal differences, anatomical differences between male and female. I've seen even some stats that say, like, just from a landing biomechanics standpoint, females tend to land a little bit different and have a little bit different muscle recruitment pattern or neuromuscular control than males. One of them being like how fast their hamstrings turn on, because the hamstrings do help protect the ACL. So I think there's a lot of potential reasons why females are. And then I have my other thoughts too that, hasn't been shown in research, but just common sense sort of could be good reasons for it. And those things are actionable things that we can change. And those are the ones that really try to take advantage of. The ones that you can't change, I think those are only meaningful to say, hey, these are the groups I think should pay the most attention to these things. If you are in this higher risk profile, even though you can't change anything about that you are in that bucket, now we need to be a little bit more about the things that are modifiable.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. And I agree. And I think where you're kind of going on the gender side is I think obviously gender itself is non-modifiable, but my follow-up question with people is always, is it actually just the gender that makes them more at risk? Or is it some of the modifiable risk factors, quad hamstring ratios, overall strength and power, rate of force development, exposure to training, some of these things that maybe females are more likely to have some of these modifiable risk factors that then those stack up. And when you look at it across a large population, it's females are more likely to have this injury, but maybe we could do something about it to make that population as a whole a little more robust and less at risk by addressing some of those other modifiable things that you're talking about. And I think the other thing that we can't ignore with this is probably the biggest risk factor for an ACL injury is having a previous ACL injury.
Right.
Which goes back to the whole point of this podcast is like one of the best modifiable risk factors that we can have is trying to get you to not have your first one.
Yeah.
We'll dive in a little bit on some of those maybe more modifiable risk factors, things that if you are screening either an individual or a team or someone within our office that wanted to try to limit their risk, that we would want to look at and maybe try to address.
Yeah. There are some simple things you can do. And then there's some more like high-tech things that we'll commonly do at our clinic. One of the simple things is looking at range of motion. The big areas that I tend to look at or do you think are meaningful are going to be hip rotation. Because if someone's really stiff in one way, basically range of motion just allows us to get a picture of what are their movement options that they have given the range of motion they have. Because if they're stiff in a certain area, well, now I know they can't even get into the position just because they don't have the requisite range of motion. And that's a different problem than, say, strength or power. Limited ankle range of motion is another big one, because it's something that is really important in terms of these higher risk positions is that they can load deeply into their knee, because ACL doesn't really tear into deeper positions. They tend to be quite shallow. So having the ability to load deeper is really important. And there are some big factors that go into that, such as quad strength, ankle range of motion, knee range of motion, if you will, but it's not like you're going into deep ranges there. So just from a range of motion standpoint, we'll tend to screen through that. If there's ever any big red flags side to side, sometimes it's injury history or just how they grew up. Those are going to be important things to be able to measure, quantify, and then try to work on and improve. And then some of the others are, like you had mentioned before, some of these strength ratios. So females typically tend to have a little bit higher quad dominance versus males, meaning that their hamstrings are proportionally stronger than their hamstrings. Usually we want to see 60 to 80% the same strength of hamstrings to our quads, and females tend to be a lot on the lower end, and that is a bit of a risk factor too. Hip strength is going to play a big role too, so we'll tend to measure that and hopefully try to quantify as best we can. But then another big part of it is I could have good range of motion, I could have good strength, but the topic of motor control or how someone moves could still be lacking. And the better motor control or stability or their body awareness, however you want to call it, that they have also is another modifiable factor that you can sort of measure and you can work to improve too.
Yeah, for sure. This injury has been studied a ton because it is relatively prevalent. And we have a pretty good idea with these non-contact injuries. They're almost all in a relatively straight knee. They happen really fast, way faster than you could consciously control that knee position. They involve some element of rotation and collapse in there. And that's what stresses the ACL. And sometimes it fails. And if we can get them out of that position, give them the movement option that they don't have to rely on that, try to retrain the brain to move in a different way, create like pre-tension in certain positions, that all stacks up over time. And so I think, I don't know, philosophically, the way that we've always approached it is rather than just going to instantly, oh, it's a motor control thing, do they have the range of motion, the strength, the rate of force development, the balance between these muscle groups to get into those positions? Because if not, that's thing A. Then can you actually utilize all those, sequence them, coordinate them, and then have those movement behaviors emerge on a field? A little bit more complicated, but there are things that you can do to try to help that emerge more frequently.
100%. That's a good, succinct way to put it.
Yeah. So I guess if we started looking at, okay, someone came in, we did this testing. The one other thing before we moved on, injury history, even if it was an ACL, sometimes there's these big asymmetries, or maybe more common in older athletes than a young high school kid that this is their first injury, but someone that had an ankle sprain, had meniscus injury previously, or maybe they had some patellar tendonitis type things. Those can result in these asymmetries that either have the side that the injury was on be compromised with some of these factors, or they're favoring one leg so much that it puts stress. They're like avoiding it because it's painful. It puts stress on the other side, and we actually see the other side tear. And that is one of the things that when we do all this, sometimes you see these big asymmetries and you start peeling back the layers. It's like, oh yeah, well, 5 years ago, I had this thing that I didn't think anything of that can show up there as well. Yeah.
One recent example I just give to kind of paint the picture is anterior knee pain. Osgood Schlatter's is pretty common in growing, adolescent athletes. And I can even be removed from that, say I'm out of pain for a while, but if I dealt with pain for quite some time, my body's going to move in ways that try to lessen the pain. And a lot of those tend to be stiffer knee positions because the more I bend my knee when it's loaded, it hurts more. So even when you're out of pain, sometimes they have these learned movement competencies, and that's just how they normally move now. But if we still put it back to like the higher risk positions, if they're just used to moving with stiff knees all the time, even if I'm out of pain, even if, say, my strength is restored and all of that looks fine, sometimes it's just these movement habits that can put them at risk too.
Yeah. I think those are all really good points, and why I wish there was like one magic silver bullet that we can just solve this for everybody, but it is more nuanced than that. And so I think that if we were to say, okay, what is the best possible outcome? Okay, if you're an individual that has a lower body injury and plays a cutting pivoting sport, you should for sure get testing to make sure that you are fully recovered and there's not these lingering deficits. That's probably step one. If that box is checked off, then it's okay. Maybe if you're in a high risk sport, maybe you're someone that you're not a great mover, or maybe you don't have a great strength level to start with. Maybe going through some more detailed testing, getting the asymmetries measured, getting those ratios quantified, and getting a plan specific to your body to try to get it to move better would probably be the next best thing. If we move past that, are there strategies team-wide that have been shown in the research that we can incorporate across more than just one individual athlete, that we can help with kind of this detailed approach to say, hey, as a group, this isn't as good as everyone coming in and doing their own individually programmed thing, but we might be able to move the needle a little bit as a whole statistically.
Yeah, I think some of the research is imperfect, but there is research out there that basically looks at healthy cohorts, one that might implement this plan that's just kind of a generic plan with that group versus one that doesn't. And then what are the rates of injury down the road? And it does seem to work even with those pretty, basic ones. Something like the FIFA 11 or FIFA 11 Plus is a big one. A lot of them have the same principles, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But that really just goes to show that even pretty generic stuff, as long as it's consistently done and with effort and hopefully with good oversight and coaching, that it can significantly reduce injury rates. I think on some of the studies I've seen is 50 to 60% less rates of injuries, whether those are chronic injuries of I slowly started to get knee pain over time, or even the acute ones like I strained my hamstring or I did tear my ACL. It kind of covers both boats with those, and it's still way better than doing nothing. And there's a lot of actionable things that can be done from the skill coach, or say it's the soccer or lacrosse coach standpoint of how can we orient our practices to try to fit these in? Because I usually say the best player ability is availability. So if we constantly have good athletes that are injured because of X, Y, and Z reason, I think it's always worth the time of both the athlete side or the coach's side to implement it into their training so that they can have as much success as possible.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And so when you mentioned FIFA 11, there's probably 2 or 3 other ones that have been named that they're basically warm up. So what are some keys if you were going to work with a team? Obviously, we vary it based off the sport and all of those things, but kind of big picture, what are the components of a strong warm up that should be incorporated if we want to try to reduce ACL injuries?
Yeah, some of the big ones are going to be, some flexibility of main muscle groups. It's going to be strengthening of main muscle groups, which a lot of them tend to be lower body or core. I can't say bicep curls is going to prevent ACL injuries. I've never seen anything with that, so I wouldn't waste my time. So flexibility, strength, those like neuromuscular control things, which a lot of those can be jumps or landings, or sometimes it's some distraction going on or we're paying attention to something else. Those are like the motor control type drills. And pretty much like using those main 3 things, if they incorporate that, it's going to do better than nothing. Ideally, there's some structure behind it of how it segues into one another or over the course of the season or through the athlete's life, that it's progressive, because that's an important concept with these is ideally they are progressive. A lot of the studies haven't been, and they're still beneficial. But in all of what we know from the other straight training side, that when things are progressive, it is going to help more so, both from the injury risk reduction standpoint and then the performance side too.
Yeah, no, I think those are good points. And if you're a team or a coach or a player that doesn't have this, Brett actually gave a talk earlier this year at a Wisconsin soccer coaches meeting. We actually have a warm up that we created that is in a PDF format. So definitely feel free to reach out, comment on this video, and we would be happy to send you the PDF of that if you needed some example of what could be done. And doesn't have to take, we're not talking hours, 8, 12, 15 minutes every day across the course of the season. And I think that consistency is key. This isn't something that you can just do, hey, we did an ACL prevention program for the first 4 weeks of the season, we're good for the rest of the year. The effect does not last. It has to be every day. It has to be continuous for it to really work.
Yeah. I mean, I've even seen studies that kind of go into show like what parts seem to be the most beneficial, and consistency is a big one. It seems like the groups that do even 1 day a week, they don't really get much of a benefit, but the ones that do, I think the minimum I usually see is 2 days, but higher frequency can tend to be better. I tend to recommend 2 to 3 just to try to get buy-in, but generally more frequent if it's doable. At that exposure piece and getting the practice of these movement patterns and these different strength training type things is more helpful from the motor control and motor learning standpoint. So generally 2 days a week, 15 minutes a piece would be the absolute bare minimum. And if we can afford some more, we would try to too.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think outside of just the warm up, is there anything else that we could incorporate from a larger team perspective to try and help move the needle on this injury as well?
Yeah. I mean, even on the fields type stuff, you can get them doing harder, like strengthening, if you will. And this could be outside of practice or maybe at the tail end of practice. It seems to be when it works the best. That aside from just doing the warm up side, like you can do different lunge variations, squat variations, jump lands, different like plyometric type drills that really just kind of focus on those main concepts that we talked about before. It's not only the warm up.
Yeah. No, I think that just that strength training piece and practice moving well, like being supervised, good coaching, having that technique be really sound is very important with those as well. Okay, I know you've got a busy evening here, so I don't want to take too much more of your time, but if we went through just a couple quick myths that I hear about quite a bit with ACL injury prevention, and you can give your brief reaction to some of these. Do ACL braces prevent ACL tears?
Not that I've seen in the research. They can be helpful. Like usually this feel that I give to people is it doesn't seem like they're bad. It doesn't seem like they create more injury risk, but it doesn't seem like it necessarily helps. So I usually take it on an individual basis. And if someone feels much more confident and doesn't think about their knee when they're playing with one on, they might benefit from using it. But if it takes away their focus of what they're doing on the field, and now that's all on my knee, then I would say it's probably not for them.
Yeah, I agree. I think maybe in some contact ones, you have that brace on and someone falls on your leg, I think there's a chance that it helps you. But I think I'm with you. I haven't seen anything on the non-contact side, which is way more common.
Yep.
Okay. Is prevention only for elite athletes?
Definitely not. I usually think the earlier we can start, the better. Like even as young kids, say we're 8, 10 years old, I had a coach come up to me after that conference you're talking about and ask, when is it okay to? As soon as you can coach them through basic things, like these don't need to be these extravagant, intense plyometrics to be beneficial. We could hold a split squat or a lunge and just go over time. Let's try to build some strength in that position, try to gamify it a little bit. The sooner we can get them access to treating their body and trying to help maintain health and performance, they build habits at a young age. It's much more likely to be consistent as they're older. So I think we're going to get the most bang for our buck as soon as we can start.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you kind of hit it there. The habits, if you've been doing the same warm up and it's just part of your routine every time you go to the field, the likelihood is that you're going to stick with that in high school and in college. And this is what I do before I play soccer or basketball. And I just do it every time.
Exactly.
Okay. And then we kind of hit on this one a little bit, but once you've torn an ACL, there's no more point to participate in a prevention program.
That's probably even more false. Like we mentioned back in the first place, the biggest risk of an injury is a previous history of it. If you have a history of it at all, if you were really diligent about it before, well, let's continue it or even be a little bit more focused on the specific things that you need to be doing, because we really need to make sure it's the first and only one and that you're not one of those recurrent people.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's so important. It's why the vast majority of the people that do their ACL rehab with us will come in monthly, quarterly, at least twice a year for borderline the rest of their career, at least through the first couple of years, and just monitor, watch for changes. Your body's constantly evolving, and those same things we talked about before. Just because you were symmetrical once doesn't mean that you're symmetrical in 6 months or in 12 months or 18 months. And if we can monitor that and stay on top of it, I think it's really important.
Yeah.
Any last big takeaway that you'd want a parent of a high school athlete or an athlete to hear this talk and really internalize and take with them?
I think it's just weighing the importance of, soccer skill versus injury risk reduction type training. And it's, oh, my kid's not fit for that, or they're not yet. It's absolutely, yes, they should be. Because the worst thing anyone can go through is that obviously they want to train to play. They enjoy the sport. They want to compete. And if they go through one of these injuries, it's obviously completely sidelines them. And so being able to be active and an active participant and getting started in some type of a prevention program, whether that's a specific thing with a trusted coach, or they're starting to get introduced to strength training and say some of the plyometric training, to some type of training that's outside the sport skill. There's a reason why basically every professional athlete does do it, is because it works on the performance side and the injury side. So if we can really prioritize that, even at the young age, when parents and kids really prioritize the sport, it's going to go a long way.
Yeah, no, I think that's so true. You hit on it with her talks. I'm glad you touched on it too. It's for her, she was out of competition for 11 months and out of her practice and her skill development. Her teammates were all getting better and she's just trying to get back.
Right.
It's a huge drag on your development. And if we can keep you out of our office from the rehab standpoint and out on the field competing and playing and developing and doing what you love, that is one of our primary goals. So hopefully this podcast was really helpful for people. You're able to take away. If you have questions, feel free to reach out, email, drop a comment. We'd be happy to share some PDFs of warm-ups that we put together for teams in different sports. If you don't know what that could look like, if you're interested in going through an ACL prevention type evaluation. We do those in our office. We have all the technology, can give you all of those strength ratios, asymmetries, movement analysis that we were talking about throughout this podcast. And you can reach out and get those scheduled. Brett, thanks for your time today. I know you've got a busy afternoon. Thanks to everyone for listening. We'll see you guys on the next episode.